We'll get started then. So hello everybody and welcome to today's presentation. We are celebrating the 40th anniversary of Teaching Games for Understanding. So throughout this year we are hosting a series of webinars on a variety of different topics. Today's topic is going to be on Teaching Games for Understanding and the spectrum of teaching styles. Today's presentation is going to be hosted by Dr. Brendan SueSee from Southern Queensland
University of Southern Queensland.
University of Southern Queensland. Thank you for that one. I get confused where the university goes round. Without further ado, Brendan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I'll just share my screen to get the party started, so to speak. And I'll just go into, we good with that one, or should I go to slideshow? Is that better?
Slideshow's better, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Alrighty, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, obviously, as well. I appreciate the invitation. I am presenting on behalf also of Associate Professor Shane Pill. Some of you guys may know his work within the game-based approaches research, or our version of teaching games for understanding, or the Australian version of it, some people say, is what's called a game sense approach. So Shane is from Flinders University in Adelaide, which is in the southern part of Australia. And as Ellen said, I am from the University of Southern Queensland, which is just outside of Brisbane, a little bit further north than Shane. Some might say the tropical north. But before I get started, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country and acknowledge and honour the Djabal, the Jarawir peoples of Toowoomba, the Yagara, and the Yugarapul people of Springfield and Ipswich, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, Sydney, as well as the Camberwell people of Stanthorpe, as the traditional owners of the lands and waterways where the University of Southern Queensland is located. And I would also like to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. So, as I was saying, what are we going to suggest or speak about in this presentation tonight? So, first of all, we're going to use the spectrum of teaching styles to use it as a set of lenses or goggles or glasses to look at the 6-step TGfU model proposed by Bunker and Thorpe, and actually suggest that it's a cluster of teaching styles which may include, but is broader than what's usually spoken about in TGfU literature as guided discovery, problem solving, or discovery teaching. So we will still suggest that those teaching styles are sometimes used, but we're going to suggest it's perhaps a few more than that as well. We're going to also argue that whilst TGfU speaks about student discovery and problem solving by asking questions of students, that in some cases, it may not actually be guided discovery or any type of discovery process. We're going to base this on looking at what's the objective of the teaching or coaching episode, and look at what it is that the teacher or the coach is asking the student to do to show this. And finally, we've written about this before in two of these publications. Are the pictures here on the left of two books suggesting that game-based approaches or teaching games for understanding are actually generally a cluster of styles, not just one style. And lessons or coaching sessions should usually be seen as episodic, or a series of little episodes. So this presentation is actually based on an upcoming article or book chapter that Shane and I are going to submit or have written. We have written about game-based approaches, teaching games for understanding, and constraints-led approaches. And some of those chapters are in the books here on the left. So in 2020, we edited and authored a book, The Spectrum of Teaching Styles in PE. And then last year in 2021, just before Christmas, we applied the spectrum to sports coaching. So that was the first time we'd actually taken it across. Shane and I had many discussions in the past about how, of course, sport and physical education have very similar subject matter, physical activity. The objectives sometimes might be a bit different, but we wondered why it had never made the jump, so to speak. And we applied it last year along with a couple of other great authors, Joss Rankin, also from Flinders, and Dr. Mitch Hewitt, who did a lot of his PhD work, was actually on applying the spectrum to sports coaching. So if you're interested in looking at how the spectrum can be applied to sports coaching, I definitely suggest having a read of that top book. Oops, not clicking along. What's happening? Okay, all right. So what is going to happen tonight or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world? First of all, it's going to be a short, probably 10, 15 minute 101 of the spectrum. And I certainly encourage questions in that first part because I don't want to leave anyone behind. I'm not sure how much spectrum knowledge some of you have, but we'll go through it kind of quickish. I wish I could guarantee that you're going to understand it really well, but I'm not that great a teacher to be able to explain quite a complex theory very, very quickly. We're going to look at the 6-step TGfU model and apply it to a couple of examples of game-based approaches. And then we're going to use the spectrum to identify the teaching styles that could be used to meet the objectives in those episodes. And then finally, we'll finish off with a little bit of Q&A. So I'm not sure if you guys are feeling confident to do this, but just a little bit just to see how much we know. So you can either use the icon to give me a thumbs up, or you can turn your camera on and give me a real thumbs up. If you feel confident, you can answer a yes or no, or you can, of course, type in the chat box. So first of all, who's heard of the spectrum of teaching styles?
Yeah, I think it's commonplace in our field.
Thank you very much. Yep. Okay. Anyone else heard of it or want to give me a thumbs up that they've heard of it? If you can use the response icon. Yep. Thanks, Claudio. Thanks, Naoki. Anyone know who discovered it? No? Anyone got a rough idea of how old it is? No, it looks like very lucky that I'm going to do a quick 101. And what is it? Alrighty. So my background is mostly health and physical education, but obviously, like many HPE teachers, have also had a career in coaching. So I'll probably use terms such as teacher and student, but of course, given that coaching, I would argue, is still an educative process, coach and participant can still transcend those words as well. So first of all, people say or suggest that it began in 1966, so it's 56 years old now, when Mauston discovered the spectrum of teaching styles. They use the term discovered because he didn't invent it. It was when he defined teaching as a chain of decision making that he then discovered the different teaching styles that emerged. So if you want to imagine a little bit like Isaac Newton and gravity, Newton didn't necessarily invent gravity. People had been falling out of trees or falling down or whatever, things had been falling the whole time. It's just that he discovered the concept. So Mosston defined teaching, basing it on the premise that teaching is a chain of decision making. That is, who's making the decisions and the when and what, or the intentions or purpose of those decisions. When you use that definition, I'm sorry, just go back a step. He decided that, or suggested that those decisions could be made in 3 parts or 3 places, if you want to say, in a lesson. The pre-impact set, which are the decisions that define the intent or the lesson objectives or the skills, the tactics, the principles, etc., that the coach or the teacher wants the participant or student to learn. The impact set, which is the actual face-to-face interaction or the implementation of the episode between the teacher, student, or coach and participants. And the post-impact set is usually concerning feedback about the performance in the impact set, evaluating the overall congruence between the intent, that's the pre-impact, and the action of the learning experience. So in one way, it sometimes helps to imagine these three places as actually being a circle. So pre-impact, what it is you want the learner to learn by the end of the practice, the impact set, the actual doing, and the post-impact, the feedback about how well they had achieved or had not achieved the result. When you use this definition of teaching or coaching as it's an intentional chain of decision-making, these 11 styles emerge when you look at who is making the decision. On the left-hand side, really briefly, is what's known as the reproduction cluster. These 5 styles are called the reproduction cluster because the participant or student is usually recalling a model of knowledge, tactics, etc. The 6 styles on the right-hand side are known as the production cluster because they are using the cognitive operation of either discovery or creativity. Now, a little bit of spectrum philosophy, so to speak. First of all, the spectrum has what's called a non-versus approach. That is, one style is not better than another style. They are only valued for what they can achieve, the objectives which they can meet. Mauston and Ashworth, Sarah Ashworth joined Mauston a little bit later on in the journey, but Mauston and Ashworth suggested that educational ideas are quite often presented in opposition to the status quo or opposition to each other. And a great example, I guess, if you want to say in the field of modal learning or pedagogy, is the concept of direct instruction versus indirect instruction, saying that one is better than the other. Now, I will not be arguing tonight that one is better than the other. I will just be, if you want to say, using, as I said, a spectrum lens to say at times one may achieve an objective more successfully than another. But when ideas are viewed in opposition like this, they quite often force teachers or coaches to abandon the knowledge that they have learnt. And if you don't abandon the knowledge and get on board, so to speak, you're quite often described as negative, cynical, old, or things such as this. But to view it a certain way, and I guess I'm showing my age here as well, even when we do, if you want to say abandon something and say, oh, we're not doing that anymore. There's a saying that someone once said to me, which is even a clock, obviously an analog clock, a clock that is broken is right twice a day. So it's very rare that something is 100% right and 100% wrong. And I think we would all admit that if there was one best way to teach or one best way to coach, someone would have written a book, sold it, and of course be a billionaire by now, and every problem would be solved. But that's not going to happen. So there is no one way which is best, and there is no one way which can achieve everything. So just to quickly go through the 6 production cluster styles, because 3 of them in particular are often used or spoken about being used in a teaching games for understanding model. So the first one is style F, or guided discovery, sometimes also referred to as an inquiry approach or Socratic questioning. This is where the teacher for the first time asks a series of questions, usually open-ended, leading the learner or participant to discover a previously unknown concept or piece of knowledge. Style G is known as convergent discovery, also perhaps known in other circles as problem-based learning, a game sense approach, TGfU, inquiry, etc. Convergent discovery is where a teacher usually sets a problem or asks a question of which there is one answer they are desiring the student to discover. One answer, not 2 or more, because 2 or more would be style H, divergent discovery, where teacher sets a problem to solve or asks the student to create 2 or more or multiple responses to the question or problem. The last 3, not used as much, but I'll just mention them. Style I is the learner design individual program. This is where a teacher would give a student a topic, and the student or player would then create a series of learning episodes to learn about the topic. They would set the goals, etc. Style J, learner initiated. In this case, the learner chooses the topic and makes all the decisions and decides how they want to use the teacher or a teacher if they so choose. And finally, Style K, or self-teaching, probably very rarely used at all, is where someone says, I want to learn about something. They create a series of episodes, which I must stress are usually production cluster episodes or discovery episodes, to learn something new. Just to probably clarify, if someone said I wanted to learn about something and then they just got onto YouTube and watched video of just someone doing it, they're really just a series of practice style episodes, not discovery, because they're really just replacing a teacher with the computer. All right, so why would I need these styles before we move on? If we acknowledge that there are numerous developmental channels of a human, the physical, the social, the ethical, the emotional, the cognitive, one teaching style or model could not achieve all these things on their own. So you have to use a series of teaching episodes or styles to achieve these. If we just develop someone or a person or a player through reproduction cluster styles, those first 5, all as we would be developing in them is memory/recall. And in some cases in the world, like Australia, United Kingdom, New Zealand, we all have syllabus documents. So in a lot of cases, they will tell us to teach certain things which require social skills, emotional skills, cognitive skills, etc., along with the physical to be used. So a range of teaching styles are required to do those. The last slide, I believe, on the spectrum is, to finish off this philosophy type part of it, is some people may already be sitting there going, 11 styles, Brendan, you've lost me. I barely use 3. That's okay. Mauston and Ashworth have said they knew teachers who knew the spectrum really well. 40 years, they probably only used 3 or 4 styles at the most during their career. Now that's a different presentation, but I'll assure you it's not about laziness, stupidity, lack of knowledge. It's a whole range of other things. But it's not the ability to know these styles, it's the ability to know the style, but also to know when to use the style. Not just, I know 11 styles, but I'm using them at the wrong time. By knowing these styles, it helps move away from a method of pedagogy that Richard Tinning described as the pedagogy of practice, which usually looks like the teacher or coach demonstrating, explaining, and then the player or student practicing. If you just do that, you're only going to be using reproduction behaviour. And I guess if we speak about the term movement, both literally and metaphorically, movement of the student is required for learning. New knowledge, challenges, decisions, etc. So new things must be done outside of just asking them to recall models in some way. Alrighty, just quickly ask, have I lost anyone yet? I know it was a bit of a rush, but I'm on the clock, obviously. No? Okay. All right. So something that many of us are probably a lot more familiar with, perhaps more than the spectrum. So I'm hoping I'm moving into some familiar territory here as we are speaking about TGfU and the 40th anniversary, is Bunker and Thorpe's 6-step model, which we're going to look at step by step at the possible teaching styles used at each stage of the model. I'm going to suggest certain styles could be used to meet the objectives of the steps, but I am not going to argue that is the only style that could be used. It's just styles which could be used. I'm going to use a modified game of cricket. So I hope I've got some English people here as well who understand the game. I wasn't quite sure how wide the variety of audience would be. It's a game called Super Twos, Modified Cricket, which is actually from this book by Shane Pill, called Play with Purpose, Game Sense Sport Literacy. And I will also use a game of football or soccer to show what that looks like. So just quickly, the 6-step model, I'm pretty sure we're familiar with it, but first of all, 1, the game, 2, the game appreciation, 3, the tactical awareness, 4, making decisions, or as I like to call it, the what and the how, 5, skill execution, and then 6, the performance. So here we go. So first of all, we'll set the context for us. Super twos and this diagram here. let's presume that first of all, students have some striking ability and some fielding ability, just a little bit. Let's also presume there will be, playing this game, 8 students or 8 people put into pairs. So 4 pairs. Every one of the fielders, so at any point in time, there will be 6 people to bowl, and they will bowl 6 balls each to the batters. Each batter, so the batting in pairs, will face 24 balls each, or 48 in total for the pairs. So just to help you with the diagram, the stars represent the fielders, so you can see there. Down at one end would be a bowler, and at the other end would be a wicket keeper, someone catching the ball. So if you think about softball and baseball, this is like the catcher. The 2 smiley faces are the batters. The ball will be bowled on this rectangle called the wicket, and the 11s, or the 2 rectangles at the back there, to represent the wickets. So as I said, some striking and fielding knowledge, but limited gameplay or tactical awareness in this group is what we've got here going on. So from Pill's book, he suggests that you could potentially ask these questions. When do you try to hit the ball along the ground? When do you try to hit the ball in the air? And how do you place the ball to score a run? So let's start with the model. We're speaking about this as steps 1, the game, and step 2, game appreciation. So straight up, the teacher would explain the rules of this game and how to play and score runs. Now, of course, why? I would argue that the teacher or coach is going to do this in these 2 places, step 1 and step 2, because the teacher is presuming that participants have some skills to play that game, and they understand the rules and the modifications. So as an example, I'm saying to the bowler, you will bowl the ball on the wicket. In effect, I'm instructing them, this is what I want you to do. I'm saying to the batter, I want you to hit the ball to try and score runs or run between the wickets. I haven't directed them to do it anyway, so I'm presuming that the player will reproduce a known kind of swing to try and hit the ball. The fielders will probably use a way which has been slightly successful in the past for fielding and slightly successful for throwing and catching. This is a practice style B episode in that you are recalling known ways to play, known rules, etc. Now let's presume that some students have developed skills, so they will recall the skills of striking, fielding, bowling, etc. Now the teacher may create some modified rules that are new to the student, but we would argue that it is not guaranteed that just because you modify a rule or there's new movement or it requires new movement abilities to be developed if you modify it. So let's say as an example, like a lot of kids, even in countries where cricket is popular, they can't bowl. So the modification might be, I want you to throw the ball. Now, of course, you're asking them to throw the ball because it's something you presume they have the skill to do. So step 1 and 2, I'm suggesting is practice style in most cases. However, it could be guided discovery as well, because let's presume just for a moment, I have a novice participant and they're unsure about how to do something. This presents an opportunity where, of course, I could just tell them, but at the same time, I could use, as is common in teaching games for understanding, a guided discovery approach to ask them a series of questions to lead them to the discovery of a concept, excuse me, a movement skill, etc. That would be perfect. However, if the student actually had prior knowledge and I did ask them a series of questions, then I don't think the student is discovering anything if they already know the answer. As Mauston and Ashworth and other people may argue, you can't discover something that you already know. So in this case, it would be practice style again. All right, step 3, which is tactical awareness And step 4, the how and the when. So let's say we have a student now in this situation who can hit the ball, they're able to make contact, but they frequently hit it in the air and get caught. Now they can be taught tactical awareness through modified games during step 3 if the students are guided by the teacher to develop that tactical awareness of how to gain an advantage over their opponent. So you could ask as the teacher or coach, all right, now you're getting out a fair bit. When do you try to hit the ball along the ground? Now I would argue, or Shane Pill and I would suggest, that this is a convergent, so there's one answer here, a convergent discovery episode that could be used. That being, there is one correct answer to the problem or the question, or as Mauston and Ashworth say, convergent discovery is to discover the correct or the predetermined response using a convergent process. Now, the step 4, the how and the when. So the student might attempt to discover the principle or tactic. That is basically ball on the ground, less chance of getting caught. The student then, if they know this tactic, will try, as Bunker and Thorpe say, to exploit the rule and desire to implement the tactic. And this actually leads to the how to. So they want to know, how do I do it? Now, Bunker and Thorpe suggest that tactical awareness allows the learners to recognize the cues of what to do. That's the skill selection, and the how to based to the how to do it, the skill based on the circumstances of the game. So I guess a student we are hoping by playing this game of Super Twos would realize that if they hit the ball in the air, they're going to get caught if it is near a person who can catch. So in that situation, they will desire to hit the ball on the ground to make it hard for that player to catch them out, or they're trying to exploit the rule. So in that situation, the student has not considered the how to of hitting the ball on the ground. So I said at the start, they were frequently hitting in the air. So again, this presents the opportunity to use a teaching style known as guided discovery to help the student discover the concept of how the angle of the bat face determines the trajectory of the ball. So you could ask them, you know, if I swing the bat when the bat face is facing up, which direction will the ball go? Hopefully the student would say it would go up. If you said, if I swing with the bat face facing down, or the plane comes down, which direction will the ball go? And they would hopefully realize the concept. Now, if they didn't realize the concept, or maybe just if the teacher was quite skilled in their spectrum of teaching styles routine, they could also say, hey, look, let's do a convergent discovery, or let's use convergent discovery to help the students discover the concept. So I might say, all right, students, I'd like you to pair up. You're going to play a game. One of you will be player A, one will be player B. Player A will toss a half volley to the batter, player B, who is asked to try and hit a ball over a marker which is 10 meters away. See how they go. Then have player A throw 10, again, half volley, same spot, and ask player B to hit the ball, this time move the marker in maybe about 5 meters and say, you've got to hit the ball on the ground before the marker. Once they've done this little experiment, you could ask, so what did you do differently with the bat to get the ball to go over the marker when compared to on the ground before the marker? This would be a convergent discovery episode where the student is discovering one correct answer or one predetermined response to this question. All right, step 5, skill execution. So skill execution is usually done, or Bunker and Thorpe speak about it happening in the context of the game. And Hopper and Crucial-Brink have said in their 2001 article that students developing problem-solving skills which help them to understand the purpose for practicing either a technical skill needed to play the game with more tactical sophistication or a strategic maneuver practice to gain an advantage. So if we speak about football or soccer, in Australia, we have 4 codes of footballs. So we call the round ball game soccer. So that's what I'm talking about. Let's imagine we had a student or a player who could not bend the ball with accuracy, nor did they know the when to do it back from step 4. So they don't know the how and they don't know the when. From a cognitive perspective, we would suggest that the student needs to learn the skill, but they also need to learn pattern recognition so that they're able to identify the when to do it quickly and correctly. So pattern recognition can only be learned in a gameplay or a context of a modified game where the occasion arises for the need of a skill to be recalled at the appropriate moment. So gameplay creates the environments to learn to identify the situation or the cues or pattern, and then recall the appropriate skill to match the situation. So stage 5 presents an environment that might be seen to necessitate the use of a cluster of styles, or at the minimum 2 episodes. And we would argue that they would be divergent discovery and practice style. Now, just before I go into this a little bit, this is where, of course, a game-based approach, or teaching games for understanding, in my opinion, and Shane's opinion, is so fantastic for doing this. So you, of course, could teach a student how to bend the ball in a non-contextualized environment. But again, knowing how is on its own not going to give great results compared to knowing how and knowing when. You've got to know when to implement the skill as well as be able to do it. So let's imagine, first of all, now I'm going to use a divergent discovery. So 2 or more solutions to a problem. So let's say I had a player and I said, in this situation, you got a defender in front of you. You're at the top of the box, create as many ways as possible to score. So just broadly, the kid or the player might think, you know, I've got a real cannon of a leg. I'm just going to drill the ball past the first defender and I'm going to drill it past the keeper. Good luck. Second thing they might come up with is the blue line. I'm going to strike it to my left, or the yellow player's left. And the final one might be, they might actually say, oh, but, you know, coach, I've actually seen you can bend the ball around the first defender and around the keeper. But yeah, so 3 possible solutions. Now, this divergent process, now that they've come up with that, you could actually get it to become a convergent discovery episode as well. So you say to the student, all right, I'd like you to practice each of those 3 scenarios, the drill it straight through, the left and the bend. I'd like you to practice 10 times. And I'd like you to come to the conclusion is, which is the most effective method for you scoring? So a little game-like scenario, and see how they go. Now, they might come to the conclusion, oh, look, because they can't bend the ball, it was actually kicking to the left. So you as a teacher could then say to them, well, what is it that you actually need to work on to be able to do the other scenario? They might say, look, I need coach or teacher to be able to bend the ball and I can't do that. So in this situation now, you might actually say, all right, now we need to do a practice style B episode, but not just of bending the ball. Because, and this is for 2 reasons that you would still do it in a game environment. They need to learn to bend the ball with accuracy and consistency, but they also need to recognize the cues. That is, open goal on their right with the defender in front of them, and then choose to execute that strike. So style B allows for the rehearsal and retrieval of both the physical skill of bending the ball, but also the pattern recognition, which is actually based on the position of the attacker and the defenders, the keeper and the first defender. And pattern recognition provides a priming mechanism for these desired behaviors. So you may need to, of course, you know, ask the defender, hey, look, I want you to be a passive defender, so don't apply heaps of pressure. But what I want you to do is move in certain directions so that the attacker recognizes the cue and then plays the shot or tries to bend the ball. Now, the final step, step 6, is performance. And again, Hopper and Crucial Brink suggest that the performance of a skill or strategy, and where what is learned, I want you to focus on that word, learned, is measured against criteria that are independent of the learner. Now, the criteria, I would argue, is the appropriateness of the response and the efficiency of the technique. So again, it's a little bit like going back to from step 4, the how and the when, and then the 5, doing it at the appropriate time. Now, I said before, I want you to focus on the word learn. So reference to the word learned from a cognitive perspective implies memory, something that has already happened. The player has learned to do something or gained a movement ability. Therefore, based on this concept, it might be concluded that the 6th step, or number 6 step, is actually ending with style B teaching episode, as the players are recalling learned skills and strategies from steps 4 and 5 in a game-like environment, while usually the teacher or coach will be providing feedback about the performance. So step 6, as described by Hopper and Cruselbrink, I would actually say, or Shane Pill and I would argue, is style B. Now, just to throw one little thing in there to finish off with, I didn't define these styles early on from the reproduction cluster, but style C is known as reciprocal style. And really quickly, reciprocal style is where the teacher makes a criteria sheet and then pairs students together and assigns a role of saying, one of you is the doer. In other words, they will be performing the skills or the movement. And one of you is the observer. The observer is given the criteria sheet. So what you could actually do again in step 6 here is do this as a reciprocal style, ask the first student to be the performer, while the second student uses the teacher prepared or coach prepared criteria sheet to provide or measure the performance against the criteria and provide feedback. If you wanted to ask for more reflection or own self-reflection, as sometimes players need, you could actually get rid of the observer and move on to what's called style D, or self-check style, where this time you give the task or the criteria sheet to the performer, you ask them to perform and come back and measure their own performance again against the criteria that you provided. Most times coaches speak about saying they want athletes or performers that are self-reflective. So of course, if you want people to be self-reflective and we acknowledge that that is a skill, then I guess like all skills, you need to teach it and you need to practice it. But that also is another presentation. So thank you very much for listening. And of course, time for questions.
Does anybody have any questions?
Or comments, or criticisms, or queries, they're all welcome.
I have a question.
Can I? Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Kanai Haneshi. I am from the United States. Thank you for the great presentation. I am also interested in spectrum as well. So I do have some knowledge, background knowledge too. But I am always curious about how to, so I'm in physical education, teacher education as well. So when we are like teaching this pedagogy, like we have a course of pedagogy courses, how do you guys, like you have the game-based approach that, you teach how to do it, right, to the student, and then you have the spectrum concept. How do you guys at your institution teach, like, do you teach spectrum first and then go into like a game-based approach? Is it like, how do you do that? Because I think it's very valuable to know that, whole concept together,
Yes.
So can you talk about how do you guys have the
absolutely. Can I? Thank you very much for your question and thank you very much for your feedback. I appreciate it as well. At the beginning of the presentation, I showed you there was a picture of one of the books, The Spectrum of Teaching Styles in Physical Education. I have one here. I'm not sure if you can see it. It's not working too well on my screen. But there's actually 3 chapters in there from Mark Byra. I'm not sure if you know that name, Shane Pill, and I'm just trying to think of the other university, but 3 university lecturers speaking about how they use it in their institutions with their bachelor students. I would actually suggest that the spectrum is what's called foundational knowledge. for any teaching, not just in phys ed, but any teaching. So when you define teaching the way the spectrum does, series of decision-making, intentional decisions, and you look at who's making the decisions, it allows you to see a whole lot of episodes happening. Now, Shane Pill and myself and a couple of other guys actually just wrote an article, got published earlier this year, speaking about the spectrum and models-based practice. And I think it was published in Journal of Teaching in Physical Education. If you shoot me an email tomorrow, I can forward you the link to it if you can't find it. But we actually said the spectrum is the micro pedagogy or the minute-by-minute interactions of things such as TGfU, sport ed, teaching personal and social responsibility. Models have episodes in them, and these are all these small spectrum, excuse me, episodes. Models are not usually one style, and I guess that's part of what we're saying here tonight, is that TGfU is far more complex, as most teaching is, than saying, oh, it's just guided discovery. And I think I made that point early on, that if you have 25 kids coming to your class, they all have different levels of knowledge about a sport, let's say. And so if I start asking open-ended questions to the whole class, there might be 10 kids who already know all those answers. So you're not doing guided discovery, you're doing recall with them. The kids who don't know, you might be doing guided discovery, but as Mauston and Ashworth also say, you can really only do guided discovery successfully with one person, because the minute someone else shouts out the answer, the other student's discovery process probably stops. So I would suggest that you learn the knowledge of the spectrum first, and then you start looking at episodes that are happening. So if you did a little game-based approach like I've shown here tonight, you could then ask the students, like, for example, okay, we're doing a game. I'm telling you the game. I'm telling you how to play it. I'm telling you what to do. What teaching style is that? And then if you ask them, are you creating anything? No. Are you discovering anything? No. What are you doing? I'm recalling the skill of hitting. That must be practice style B then. So yeah, they go together. They certainly complement each other and give a greater understanding, I think, Kane, of how to do it.
Yeah, you know, like the spectrum scholar Mark Brewer,
Byra, yeah.
Byra, yeah, he said the spectrum is not a model, right? Like the teaching style. So you guys are teaching the spectrum concept first to the like freshman year, I guess, and then introducing different kind of models.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Claudia? Yep.
Yes, hello, Brandon. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was really cool. I was wondering, how do we manage that interplay between what's actually a teaching style or a learning style? Because the teaching style, it depends on the student's background, not only what they know, but how they learn best. So I was wondering if you ever came across this kind of dilemma or puzzle to solve. What are your ideas about this tension?
Yes, thank you very much, Claudia, for your comments and your question as well. In the spectrum of coaching, actually, no, it might be in this book here as well. We actually, Shane Pill, Mitch Hewitt and myself, conceptualized a new diagram of the spectrum. I'll see if I can find it really quickly while I'm talking to you. And I don't know how well, I probably won't show up too well on my screen, but it's, again, I'll try and see if you can shoot me an email. I'll try and send you a chapter. It's probably not coming up too good. Sorry, mate. Where we actually put the learner at the center, as you were suggesting, because there's no point, again, in just saying, I want to achieve this objective and I'm going to use this teaching style, if you don't consider the learner. And we kind of speak about that like in one way, if you use the analogy or story of saying, if I was going to make something out of wood, I would have to know, well, what's this wood like? What are the properties that the wood brings? Because there's no point in me using a certain tool if it's going to wreck or break the wood. I need to treat the wood with the properties it has. So as you were saying, think about the skills or the knowledge that the student brings, and then consider the objective or what it is we want to achieve, and the teaching style. And don't be afraid to adapt the teaching style to address the learner's strengths, if you want to say, or their weaknesses while they're developing those. So that concept, again, one of the authors, Mitch Hewitt, in his PhD, he spoke about for the first time in spectrum type research, what they call a canopy of the style. So the version that's presented in the textbook or teaching physical education, you might want to call the textbook version or the landmark version. But if you said as an example, let's say someone hadn't done reciprocal style before, and it was kids who didn't have very good social skills for giving feedback, you might say the first time, I'm not going to get the student to actually say, hey, Claudio, next time you need to keep your head over the ball. That instead, you might just say, you're going to do reciprocal style with a thumbs up, a thumbs down is not good, and a sort of like this. So you're just introducing really basic versions of it because maybe they don't have the skills. So, and again, we mentioned this in this article that I was talking about in Journal of Teaching in Physical Education. There's no point in just saying, I'm going to do a teaching style this way because the textbook says to do it this way, because if it doesn't work, well, then you're failing the student or you're failing the learner. I guess in one way, Shane Pill and I have discussed this before, that, you know, if you were trying to teach a kid to throw and catch a ball, but they couldn't catch, and you were doing like a game-based approach, and the kid got hit in the face about 3 times, you wouldn't just go to the kid, listen, mate, this is how Bunker and Thorpe said to do the model. You're wrong and I'm right. Because of course the kid would, well, he'd probably cry or he'd give up. So you of course have to adapt things sometimes and take the learner into consideration. So does that answer your question? I would say adapt the teaching style.
Yes, great. Thank you. This has been a really good moment. Thank you.
So we've got a couple of quick questions in the chat. Ashley's asked, what date was the article that you published in the the Journal of Teacher Education one?
The Journal of Teaching in Physical Education, or JOTYPE. And I think it was pretty early this year, but Ashley, if you want to send me an email, I can send you a link to the article if that helps.
Ashley, Brendan's email is in the chat, so please feel free to contact him.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share.
And Nick asked earlier on, hasn't the concept of learning styles been debunked as a myth?
Yeah, in Australia, Nick, thanks for that question. We are quite often now saying learning preference. So it acknowledges that people, I don't know, some people might say a lot of phys ed people enjoy seeing movement, but that's just a preference. It's not, yeah, because I guess you'd really say if people only, if there was a whole group of people who only learnt through instructions of reading them, well, then those people have been waiting around for 200 years, in the last 200 years when mass print production was invented or whatever. So yes, Nick, learning preference may be the go, but Mauston and Ashworth speak more about teaching style rather than learning style.
And then Kevin has asked, shall we make sense of TGfU with Spectrum, or are we incorporating the Spectrum in TGfU? He's thinking about using the reciprocal at stage 4 to make the decision. Kevin, do you want to expand upon that?
Yes,
sorry. Sorry. Yeah. I'm thinking that spectrum can be incorporated in different stages in the TGfU, saying we can still use the reciprocal that we use the in the making the decisions by observing the students play in the practice, by observing how they make the decision. We still use the reciprocal. Of course, we can still use it in the performance at the final stage for the TGfU. So I'm thinking, are we making sense of TGfU by spectrum, or we incorporate the spectrum in TGfU by different stage accordingly? Am I, do you understand what I mean?
Good question, Kevin. I would say that it's the first one. It helps you understand or see the episodes which could be used in TGfU. That's the analogy I said of like a lens, so to speak, of looking through something. So when you look at teaching, doesn't matter what teaching style it is or how a learning episode or coaching episode is happening, when you look at who's making the decisions, when they're being made, and what the student or participant is being asked to do, this is how you see the style emerge. So to answer your question specifically about the reciprocal style in stage 4, yeah, you could have someone using a criteria sheet to observe someone and provide feedback about when they're using, or the how to and the when. But yeah, I guess if you can basically do reciprocal style, if you know the content and you can break it down and you can turn it into a criteria sheet and you can get someone to observe it, then you can do reciprocal style, which is great for error analysis and things such as that, as well as the social skills of giving feedback. But yeah, the spectrum can make sense of not just TGfU, but any teaching episode or style. So yeah, thank you for that question as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very inspired me to think deeply about the application. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Are there any other questions? I know there's a few people having to disappear off for other meetings, etc. So does anyone have any sort of last minute questions? I have put Brendan's email in the chat, so please do, if you go away and think of something, to drop him an email at a later date. I've also added into the chat about our other 40th anniversary events and our other webinars, so please do catch up on those and have a look and join us through the other events. Everybody who has attended today will receive a certificate of attendance that you should receive in the next couple of hours. If you do not receive it, or if there's an issue in any way with your name on the certificate, please drop me an email at tgfu.info@gmail.com and I will sort out the issue. Any last minute questions? I think everybody seems to be relatively happy. So thank you very much, Dr. Brendan SueSee, for presenting today on TGfU and the spectrum of teaching styles. It was a very fantastic presentation, and I think everybody can go away with something new to think about and apply in their practice. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me, Ellen.
Everybody else, thank you for attending today, and we hope to see you at our future events. Thank you very much.